As most of you know, I'm a huge fan of racing games, and I have been since I was a little kid. And if you're a fan of this channel, you're most likely a fan of racing games or wrestling games, or maybe even both. Well, if you are into racing games, you're in luck, because today we're going to take a look at a variety of racing games for the PS1, the N64, the Xbox, and more. Now, not all of these are going to be stellar titles, but if you are a fan and a collector in the genre, you might even find the not-so-good games something that you might want to try. So join me as we take a blast through the past, taking a look at some more racing games. Fans of the channel most likely know that I'm a huge fan of the Rush series that started in the arcades back in the late 90s. Needless to say, I was more than thrilled to hear that the series would continue in 2005 with the release of LA Rush. Today we're going to take a look at the Xbox version, which was released side by side the PS2 version in October of 2005. Unlike previous games in the series, LA Rush ditches the individual level format for the ever so growing trendy open world format that became very popular during this time and is pretty much the standard for racing games to this day. While the city of Los Angeles is a large, sprawling metropolis for the player to explore in story mode, the map is divided up into different districts for the game's single-player race modes. The amount of detail in the game's visuals are really good for the time. Little touches like the sun glaring into your face as you drive into the sunset help set the mood for the location, and the heavy amounts of traffic also contribute in bringing the city to life. Another new addition to the series comes in the form of licensed vehicles, with 30 available here, in addition to another 20 Midway-designed original vehicles. Each vehicle can be customized from the West Coast Customs Garage, made famous from the MTV show Pimp My Ride. One big complaint here is that you can't actually modify a vehicle to your liking, such as selecting from different sets of rims or even paint jobs. Instead, each vehicle has a preset modified option, completely removing any creativity from the player's hands. Getting your vehicle on the road, you'll notice this game handles nothing like a Rush game. That tight steering and low gravity physics engine is long gone. Here you'll notice a great sense of speed as you race through city streets, smashing through objects, running from the police, and racing to the next checkpoint using the quickest route possible. Nitro pickups are scattered throughout different areas of the city and can be stored and used when needed most with the press of a button. Another cool addition here are the Burnout-style cinematic crash scenes. The vehicle damage engine is pretty detailed here, and these crashes really showcase that. The game's story mode consists of various races and missions for the player to complete throughout the map. This is also where new vehicles are unlocked and cash is gathered to be spent on vehicles and upgrades. The mode features numerous cutscenes with voice acting from the likes of Orlando Jones, Andre 3000, and Twista. My biggest complaint with this game has just always been one thing. It's just not a Rush game. It's a good racing game with plenty of cars and a high replay value, but for the simple fact that this game had the Rush name, I expected something so different than what I got. Cyber Speedway came along early in the Saturn's life, dropping in 1995. The game was originally to be called Gran Chaser, but Sega didn't want any confusion with the Saturn game Gale Racer, which was known as Radmobile in the arcades. Oddly enough, the game is known as Gran Chaser in Japan. The gameplay could be compared to the likes of games such as F-Zero and Wipeout, as you control hovercrafts known in the game as sleds, racing in a high-paced, futuristic environment throughout various planets, each containing multiple races. There are 5 sleds to choose from, each featuring unique attributes such as speed, handling, and acceleration. Sleds can be further tuned to the player's liking in the game's story mode. Scattered throughout each track, you'll find rocket pickups that can be collected and launched at enemies, but are often hard to connect with given the physics of how these sleds move around. Left and right boosts are assigned to the shoulder buttons, but aren't used for speed. Instead, these help the sled strafe, which can be used to assist in sharp cornering. Different soundtracks were used for different regions, with Japan and European releases sharing music produced in-house, while the US version featured music from the band Bygone Dogs. I'm not sure that the dated rock musical style of the US soundtrack really fits the futuristic intergalactic theme, but then again it worked for Guardians of the Galaxy. The game was applauded for its graphics, looking pretty good for such an early Saturn release, but it does fall victim to the dreaded draw distance issues that the console was known for. The story mode features illustration stills in place of regular animated or CG cutscenes, similar to what we would see in games like Twisted Metal 2, but whereas those were interesting and kept you watching, these will most likely have you pressing buttons in order to get through all of the dialogue. I'd also like to add that this game has some of the quickest load times I've ever seen on the Saturn. With the price of most Saturn games so high these days, it's nice to see that this one remains at right around $20 complete, sometimes even less, and I can definitely say it's worth that all day. Growing up as a console kid, I was always jealous of the fact that so many cool-looking racing games were exclusive to the PC, such is the case with the first two Midtown Madness games. So when it was announced that Midtown Madness 3 was coming exclusively to the Xbox, I was more than excited, and on June 17th, 2003, the very same day that it launched, I got my hands on a copy. This one was developed by Digital Illusions, while the first two titles were handled by Angel Studios before working on the Midnight Club series and later becoming Rockstar San Diego. Sticking to the format of an open-world environment, there are two massive cities in which the player can take part in the game's different modes of play. Paris and Washington, D.C. are filled with city blocks, suburban outskirts, traffic, pedestrians, but don't get too excited, you can't run them over. I tried. Cars are plentiful and diverse with everything from buses to PT Cruisers and supercars. While most of the cars in the game are licensed vehicles, there are some original creations when it comes to the game's service and law enforcement vehicles. These cars handle somewhere between arcade and sim, but definitely lean more towards arcade, with slower heavy vehicles feeling as such and faster cars easily taking neckbreak turns. In the free roam mode, you can set up options to your liking, such as the amount of traffic and pedestrians present, and also the weather, time of day, and even the season, which is something I don't think I've seen elsewhere before. While the game doesn't feature an in-depth story mode, the Undercover mode does offer a series of missions where you take the role of various occupations such as a taxi driver, pizza delivery man, paramedic, and a limousine driver, amongst others. These can be a little tough, usually resulting in numerous attempts, but that actually creates a good balance as there aren't a huge amount of these missions to complete. The two main single-player modes outside of Undercover consist of Blitz races, where you race against the clock to reach all of the checkpoints, laid out throughout many different course choices in each city, and Checkpoint Race, which is similar, but instead of trying to beat the clock, you'll take on a set of opponents. While the game didn't receive as high of praise as the first two titles in the series, it was still regarded as a solid game and would unfortunately be the last in the series. While there isn't a whole lot of depth here, it's definitely worth the $8 to $10 that it's going for. Roadsters is a game that gets a bad rap, mostly based on the reception of the Dreamcast version, which was all but broken. The Nintendo 64 version was developed by Titus Interactive and hit the console on November 30th, 1999. This is a traditional arcade-style racer which was common for the time and features licensed cars from the likes of Ford, Lotus, Fiat, amongst others, and unlicensed vehicles that bear striking resemblance to real-life vehicles from around the time. These cars are split into 3 different classes and feature quite the variety, along with the ability to change each car's color. You'll also need to select a driver separately from the vehicle selection, with each having his or her own unique personality and witty but often irritating comments during gameplay. Levels here are plentiful and feature lots of background movement to help keep them feeling alive as you race your way through locations such as a ski resort, oil fields, an amusement park, and even Area 51, just to name a few. You also have the option to select from racing courses backwards, mirrored, or both, along with the option to select wet or dry weather. But I found that the rain effects don't really hold up too well these days. The game engine can take a bit to get used to as the handling is a bit tight and cars tend to drift during longer turns, which always reminds me a little bit of the early Ridge Racer games. With a little practice, however, this becomes easier to get under control, and in return, the game becomes more enjoyable. On top of handling abilities decreasing in levels which feature snow, the frame rate also drops noticeably in these stages, which makes things even harder to control. Other than that though, I'd say this game looks really good actually. The stages all feel very active and alive, the vehicles look good, and all in all, it runs well for the most part. This is definitely a title worth checking out, especially if you've been avoiding it due to the reputation earned by the Dreamcast version. In May of 2002, Infogrames would release Test Drive Overdrive, the Brotherhood of Speed, outside of the US, but here in the States, we received it as simply Test Drive. Most of the Test Drive games from the past featured different locations from around the world, but usually with one track per area. Here we see 4 major locations with San Francisco, London, Tokyo, and Monte Carlo, but this time with numerous race layouts for each city, offering both circuit and linear options. Other games in the series have also been known for featuring licensed vehicles, and that's no exception here. With many different vehicles to choose from, including classic muscle cars, imports, and supercars, there's absolutely no shortage of variety. There's plenty of race styles to keep you busy as well, as standard races are accompanied here by drag race, where you'll select a car, wait for the green, and manually shift your way to the finish line, as well as cop chase mode, where you select from a collection of different police vehicles based on the city you select, then head to the road to take down illegal street racers. Here you'll crash into suspects in an attempt to deplete their health meters, similar to the Chase HQ series. There's also a pretty lengthy story mode where the player takes control of Dennis Black, a street racer from San Francisco who joins an exclusive underground street racing club. As you progress, you'll rise through the ranks, take on new opponents, and unlock vehicles along the way. While very arcade-like, the controls do feel extremely solid and shouldn't take very long for racing game fans to get adjusted to this one. While the pace is quick and collisions may not always be easily avoided, it's good to know that the Cruisin' USA-like crashes won't slow the player down too much, but will definitely give the traffic vehicles a nice jump. All of this, along with pretty good visuals and a loaded soundtrack featuring the likes of Saliva, Ja Rule, DMX, and others, should be reason enough for any fan of the genre to check this one out. When Wave Race 64 hit the Nintendo 64 way back in 1996, it was a fresh new approach to the genre. Being able to take to the open waters in a jet ski in fully three-dimensional environments was definitely state-of-the-art for the time. In 2001, Vicarious Visions would take that same formula to the PS1 with Sea-Doo Hydrocross. Sharing the same game engine as Polaris Snowcross on the N64, Sea-Doo Hydrocross takes you through 8 different racing courses with various locations around the world, filled with ramps, shortcuts, and destructible environments. In fact, destroying objects earns the player points, which can be used to unlock additional watercrafts. Points are also earned by performing tricks, which are done by using the L1 and R1 buttons in combination with the directional pad. The problem is, even with the full trick command list sitting in front of me, it's very difficult to pull off these tricks. Every time I managed to land a trick, it was because I was frantically button mashing or quickly spamming the command over and over and over again, and they always seemed to happen really late in my jump, like right as I was landing. What really sets this game apart from games like Wave Race 64 is the fact that it fails to recreate that feeling of racing through unpredictable waters. Handling is extremely tight and responsive, which helps with the difficulty level, but also makes it feel like you're in a wheeled vehicle on dry land. While this takes away from the experience a bit, it does make the completion of the game a realistic feat for even novice racers. Practice mode offers up 2 exclusive courses, one filled with ramps and jumps to practice tricks, while the other is filled with buoys which the player passes through as checkpoints. This is the only mode where you can select different levels of wave activity. The characters are your stereotypical arcade racers with loud personalities, and visually, the game is a mixed bag, with some levels feeling bare with little to no detail, while others are quite the opposite with lots to look at. Regardless, the water effects are really basic and objects throughout each stage are pretty low resolution. There were versions planned for the Nintendo 64, Dreamcast, and Game Boy Color, but they were all eventually cancelled. This is one that grew on me the longer I played it, but I can't say that others would experience the same results. In May of 1998, the first fully three-dimensional game in the Road Rash series would be released. Developed by Electronic Arts, Road Rash 3D would be a PlayStation exclusive, although a PC version was initially planned but eventually cancelled. As a series makes its transition from 2D to 3D, there are usually a few growing pains along the way. While the basic idea of the game hasn't changed, the delivery has, as a result of recreating the engine from scratch. The bikes respond a little bit late here, and oversteer is common, but can be overcome with a bit of practice. Combat is still a big focus, and a variety of attacks can be used to knock your opponents off of their bikes. Weapons are present as well, and are not only useful for inflicting more damage, but are just outright fun to use. The enemy AI is rather aggressive, often forcing you completely off the road or straight into oncoming traffic. I've always been impressed with the overall presentation here. The vast level designs feature changing scenery as you progress through each stage, with great attention to detail throughout. The developers used motion capture to create the game's animation, using actors on motorcycle mock-ups. The soundtrack features songs from bands like Sugar Ray, Kid Rock, The Marmen, and others. In Big Game Mode, the player purchases one of 4 bikes to start off, choosing from Sport, Racer, Rat, or Cruiser. Each bike category automatically associates the player with a specific gang that will fight with you against the other gangs as you race to win money for faster bikes. There are options for single races and time trials, but oddly enough, there is no multiplayer here, which was criticized upon the game's release. Road Rash 3D has a special place for me nostalgically, so I am a little biased. It received mixed reviews, with some people panning the gameplay and lack of multiplayer, but I still feel this one is a must-have for fans of the series. Now, I can remember not even wanting to play Road Rash 64 when I originally saw previews for it back in 1999. This game looked pretty bad, and I mean, come on, us 90s kids were pretty shallow when it came to graphics. The game was released as an N64 exclusive on August 31st, 1999, and was the first and only title in the series to not be published by EA, with THQ handling this entry. If you've played Road Rash before, you most likely know the formula by now. Choose a bike, hit the road, beat up as many opponents as possible, all while trying to duck the police and place first. The levels here aren't as diverse visually as some of the past entries, but there are plenty to choose from to keep things from getting repetitive. Another thing we get plenty of here is weapons, such as crowbars, chains, nunchucks, stun guns, spiked baseball bats, spray paint, and even an oversized banana. And there's just something so satisfying about connecting with any of these. You can choose between two basic bike types, those being sports bikes and cruisers. There are also prototype style bikes that are absolutely insanely out of control, and while I can't even begin to keep them on the road, I'm greatly entertained by the crashes that they produce. You can also select from a bunch of different riders. Hey, wait a minute. Is that who I think it is? There's also this guy that I was playing as when my son walked into the room and asked me if this was a Spider-Man racing game. The control is pretty solid here in my opinion, though I'm not a fan of the acceleration being assigned to the Z button. It just feels a little bit odd using my left hand to control the throttle. It's fairly easy to navigate through traffic and avoid crashing, with the exception of 90-degree turns where you'll want to use the brakes, or you'll probably break. As you'd come to expect from the Road Rash series, the main mode of play is big game and starts you off with enough money to purchase a bike and get you on the road racing against opponents, allowing you to earn money for new bikes and upgrades as races are won. You'll also see single race and multiplayer options in addition to big game. Now, as I mentioned before, and as you can clearly see, this game didn't win any awards for its visuals. In fact, it was badly criticized in that category. And to be fair, you can use the expansion pack here to improve graphics and even toggle some new visual options, but even then, it isn't on par with most other games on the console. According to the developer, Pacific Coast Power and Light, the reason the visuals suffered is due to the amount of riders, traffic vehicles, and pedestrians that are on screen at any given time. And given that there isn't any slowdown with all of this happening, I would say it's a pretty good trade-off. See, I've matured a little since I was 14. If you're a fan of the Road Rash series, well, you've probably already played this, but if you haven't for some reason, give it a shot, but I would do it quickly as the price for this one has been going up in recent years. In February of 2000, we would see the PlayStation follow-up to Road Rash 3D and the final game in the series when Road Rash Jailbreak hit store shelves. The game runs on a slightly modified version of the engine used for 3D, this time with quicker input responses and faster animations, which is helpful during combat. Each bike now has two options, arcade and simulation. Arcade allows bikes to correct themselves quicker coming out of turns, while simulation requires the player to countersteer manually. The four bike categories have been cut to two, with just cruiser and sport motorcycles returning here. Big game has been replaced with Jailbreak mode. Here you'll join a gang, each one using one of the two motorcycle options previously mentioned. As you start from the bottom, you'll race and fight your way through the ranks in an attempt to make captain. On the other end of the spectrum, the game's all-new 5-0 mode places you in the role of the police as you aim to take down criminals, meeting your quota, and ultimately busting your primary warrant suspect. Road Rash 3D was criticized for not having a multiplayer option, so EA made sure Jailbreak had more than a few. Standard two-player races are accompanied with new modes like Cops and Robbers, Skull to Skull, and Sidecar, where both players must work together to both attack opponents and steer the motorcycle. I feel that 3D had a slightly better look than Jailbreak, and I can't truly pinpoint why, but I do feel like it's a slight step backwards here. There's still a lot of fun to be had though, and the Road Rash vibe is definitely strong with this one. Just like its predecessor, 18-wheeler American Pro Trucker, the King of Route 66 is an arcade game that would see a console port, coming home on March 18, 2003. The evil trucking company Tornado has attempted a hostile takeover of the entire industry, and it's up to 5 brave truckers to take back the roads. Jump into your cab and beat your opponent to the given destination to win. This can be more difficult than you'd expect though, with stage layouts often requiring numerous attempts just to familiarize the different routes and find the quickest. Not to mention some of the worst enemy rubber banding I've ever seen in a game. Luckily, nitro pickups are located throughout each level and are absolutely necessary for most players to complete them. Luckily, these stages aren't very long or time-consuming, so attempting to beat a route over and over again is a little less irritating than it could be. The King of Route 66 mode is based on the arcade version, with a few additional features thrown in. You'll pick a hall, which is associated with a difficulty level, and attempt to beat your rival to the destination. You'll also run across some challenges like having to back your rig up to hit your trailer within the time limit and without causing damage. The Queen of Route 66 has you completing missions for various women that they're calling queens, which each represent a specific state. Here the player can earn money, which can then be used for tuning upgrades. These challenges also take some time to master, as the clock just is not your friend here. Other modes include the Route 66 Challenge, where you'll participate in numerous mini-games with silly objectives, like destroying as many traffic vehicles as possible or crashing as many parked cars as you can within the time limit. Meet the objective for each stage and you'll win the gold medal. There's also Rival Chase, where your goal is to destroy the opponent before the timer expires, but the odd rubber banding mechanic makes this one pretty difficult. And I guess that's just the name of the game here, difficult. I know it's an arcade title, but I would have liked to see some options to make the game a bit easier. As much as I love racing games, I definitely don't claim to be amazing at them, and if some games are just too challenging, I'll eventually stop enjoying myself before I beat them in their entirety. While I definitely think there's some fun to be had here, I still prefer 18-wheeler on the Dreamcast over this one. Every once in a while, a game comes along with the most generic title, as is the case with Extreme Go-Kart Racing for the PS1. This game was released in Japan in 2000, but didn't see a US release until 2003, very late in the PlayStation's life. Now, at first glance, this may appear to be your typical kart racer, but it becomes apparent very quickly that this couldn't be further from the truth. Instead of weapon pickups and zippers to boost you through each course, you'll rely on turbo pickups and drifting to strategically navigate each track. Turbo pickups are scattered throughout each circuit, ranging from small to full increment increases to your boost meter. Each time this meter is filled, you can use one boost. The problem is, as stages progress, they become more difficult to navigate with less straightaways, making it difficult to use these boosts. Drifting is initiated with the square button and becomes more necessary in the trickier courses, but can be quite cumbersome to get the hang of. A lot of times this can lead to oversteer, which is very hard to correct. Another issue is making contact with any object brings you to a sudden stop, and with narrow track layouts, it's hard not to hit the boundary walls or other racers for that matter. And heavier racers feature horrible acceleration, which can lead to straight up frustration. Further adding to the difficulty level, you start each race behind the pack, similar to games like Ridge Racer, which means you're constantly playing catch-up to get to first place. Luckily, third place or higher is all that's needed to progress through the game's Grand Prix mode. The game's visual style is very Japanese, from the art style to the sound. While I have to say the music is very good, the visuals aren't great, especially for such a late title. Racers are merely 2D sprites, and most of the background objects are choppy. I can, however, applaud the colorful and lively level designs. There are definitely more cons than pros here. The difficulty level is rather high. There are only 7 tracks total to choose from. The load times are really long, and visually it isn't very appealing. With that being said, if you've got the patience and you're looking for something a little different than your average kart racer, then you might want to try this one out. Might. Revolt hit the Nintendo 64 in July of '99 and was developed by Acclaim Studios London. Instead of jumping into the driver's seat of your favorite supercar and hitting the track like most racers at the time, you'll grab one of many different styles of RC cars and take to the neighborhood, toy store, museum, and even the grocery store of all places. Throw some twisted metal-like weapons into the mix, and you've got yourself a pretty diverse racer for the time. The handling can take a little practice to master, however, as these cars definitely handle like toys with tight turning that can often lead to oversteer and spinouts if you're not quite prepared. And while the levels offer diversity and excitement, they too may take a few trial runs as it's not always apparent on where you need to go, which can lead to some pretty frustrating abandonment issues for newcomers. The game holds up pretty decently as far as visuals go. The frame rate is pretty solid, and this version actually features a slightly higher draw distance than the PS1 port. The sound is decent here as well, though the repetitive dance music might grate on some people's nerves after a while. Many modes of play are available, including Championship, in which you participate in a series of races to win trophies and unlock additional series, as well as conventional single races, multiplayer, time trial, and practice modes. They also included a stunt mode, which is always a great addition to any arcade racer in my opinion. This game has gained quite the cult following throughout the years, though its sister ports on the PC and the Dreamcast remain the more popular choices. Nevertheless, the N64 version can be had for pretty cheap and offers a unique racing experience for the console. The Sega Saturn was home to so many arcade ports, and while they weren't always perfect, my expectations also weren't unreasonable, as was the case with Manx TT Superbike, which was released on the console on July 30th, 1997. Sega decided to have third-party developer Tantalus Interactive handle this one, a decision that was criticized upon its announcement, as it was believed that only Sega would do the port any justice. The game's arcade mode is exactly that, a recreation of what the arcade version had to offer, with the Saturn mode offering up the addition of a practice option and challenge mode, which showcases the game's courses played in sequence. A two-player split-screen mode would also be new here, as in the arcade, multiple players required multiple cabinets linked together. While it's often tricky to convert sit-down motorcycle cabinets to digital directional pads, they did a really exceptional job here. The game has a slight learning curve, but feels extremely satisfying to get the hang of. There's also support for the Saturn's analog controller, which is how I prefer to play, as it just feels smoother in my opinion. During this time, with arcades still visually exceeding the performance of home consoles, it was expected that games ported to console would take a graphical hit, but surprisingly here, that hit wasn't as much as we'd seen with some other titles around this time. Sure, the draw distance is worse, which is to be expected with the Saturn, and the polygon count is slightly less, but overall, they did a really impressive job here. I guess the main drawback here is that there wasn't much added as far as new content goes. Arcade games have never been designed for depth, but instead to be quick, challenging, and exciting, a way to quickly make money. At home with unlimited play, this can get old rather quickly, especially with only a few tracks, bikes, and such a small but fantastic soundtrack. This is why Manx TT would become classified as a great port, but also a perfect weekend rental upon its release. Regardless of what the critics say, this one always brought me much joy, and I still like to give it a play every so often. Speed Punks, also known as Speed Freaks outside of the US, is a kart racer that hit store shelves in March of 2000, despite starting development 3 years earlier in 1997. This one is a traditional kart racer, where you'll select from a variety of charismatic drivers and take to the game's tournament mode, where you'll take on multiple courses across different leagues, each containing 4 total races. Think of Mario Kart's Cups. You'll need to place 3rd or better to advance here, and winning a league will unlock the next one. In addition to tournament, we see single race and time trial options, as well as multiplayer. Weapon pickups are scattered throughout each course and consist of rockets, slime, bombs, and turbos, amongst others. Speed boost tokens are also picked up during races and contribute to your boost meter, which can be used with the press of a button, and becomes quite essential as the races become more difficult. Also essential is the game's drift mechanic, which will help you get your racer around tight corners, which become more frequent as the game progresses. Speed Punks is a pretty fantastic looking PlayStation title. The animations are smooth, the colors are bright and vibrant, and the overall theming of the game fits the genre perfectly. We also get a fitting soundtrack here, which completes the overall presentation. This one flew under the radar for me for many years, and I think it's probably due to the late release in the PlayStation's life. Had this released in, say, 1998, it could have competed with the likes of Mario Kart 64 and Diddy Kong Racing. Not to mention it would have beat Crash Team Racing to release. This game is top-notch and definitely deserves your attention if you're even remotely into kart racers. Alright, well I hope you guys enjoyed what we looked at today. As I mentioned, I really enjoy racing games, and it's always fun for me to come back and play these again. What are some of your favorite racing games? Let me know in the comments section below. And if you liked the video, give it a like. And if you're a fan of the channel and the content, why don't you go ahead and subscribe? I definitely plan on releasing a lot more videos, but then again, you never know when I might disappear for another year. In all seriousness, I appreciate you watching the video. I appreciate you guys still supporting the channel throughout all these years. And stay tuned for the next Spotlight video game review.